So Sue is asking, where in the Bible does it talk about borrowing and lending money?
Oh, uh, pretty much through the entire Bible, I have to say. It's a very common topic through the Bible, and often borrowing, lending, and related things also are used as analogy to talk about even the debts we owe God as a result of our sin, in a sense. And so, um, let's start off with though this first high level concept that's very important, which is generally borrowing is not favorably looked at in the Bible, or at least if you have to borrow, it's almost seen as the opposite of being blessed. So Proverbs 22:7. I'm looking at the NIV version actually because I like how it's worded better on this. It says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender." And I mean, you just think about even in our modern context, right? When you borrow, you're at the mercy of the person you borrowed from, and usually they are very sophisticated. They know how to make sure that if you don't pay back your debt, they'll grab your house or something else, right? So, or they'll know how to get a lawyer to go after you. And so many people are crushed by the burdens and the fears and all that go associated with living under debt. So God doesn't want anybody to experience that. And so even for the Hebrews and Jews, this was a very important thing to them, even as a matter of pride. So you go to Deuteronomy 15, and then this whole chapter is a lot on debts. For example, every 7 years, debts would be more or less forgiven and wiped out. At least, people will be slaves, then they'll be freed. And in the middle, in the heart of this Deuteronomy 15, God says, start at verse 6. He says, "For the Lord your God will bless you just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, you shall not borrow." So here's God, a way of illustrating how much you'll be blessed. And again, borrowing is seen almost as being cursed. If you go a little bit forward, though, to a couple verses to verse 7, now God starts talking about how we should be with our relationships with others. And he says, "If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of your gates in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him, and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs." So God saying, if you are blessed, if you are in a state where you can actually share your blessings with others, you're obligated to do so. I mean, really at the core of the law is love. And if you really love somebody, you will help provide it for them. You will help give them what they need. If they're in a hard time, lend them the $100, $1,000, whatever, help them get up off their feet, and so that they don't have to become a slave to somebody else because of debts. So really there's a lot on not just borrowing, but also the lenders, a lot on the lenders and what you should and shouldn't do. Exodus 22. So we're just looking at Deuteronomy, still Levitical laws, more or less. In book of Exodus, God says, "If you lend to any of my people," so I guess it's talking about, people within your church, but it doesn't have to be, right? "If there's any of them who are poor among you, you shall not be like a money lender to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge," okay, so even take it as security or something, well, I got to hold on to something, make sure he pays me back. God says, "If you do that, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in, and what will it be that what will it be that when he cries to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious." So God's saying, he will take notice if you extract a lot out of people, and you're just trying to cover your bases, trying to take care of yourself, and really making this other person suffering. God says, "I'm going to take note of that, and you don't want to be on the receiving end of his frustration for what you're doing to his precious person." And this is going to be a common theme. Leviticus 25, verses 35 to 40, it gets back to saying, don't charge usury, don't do interest, lend without these things, don't make a profit by lending. Your lending should be a blessing to people who really need it. In Nehemiah, there was a story where Nehemiah comes to find out, and this is in chapter 5, where he hears about how the Jews who had returned from Babylon, there was some who had more money, and then they were lending, and they were charging tons of interest, and then they were taking over the land of people who then weren't able to pay, and then people were panicking and coming to Nehemiah saying, "Please help us! We're being crushed by the debts by our fellow Jews here." And Nehemiah just like, what? And choose out the rich people. Says, you guys need to, take care of this. Don't take back anybody's land. Don't do this. Make right what you've done. And probably for a period of time, then this practice was stamped out again. Now, if you read the Psalms, there's quite a bit about lending. So, for example, Psalms 15, verse 5, it says, "He who does not put out his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against innocent, he who does not do these things shall never be moved." And the whole context of this chapter is more or less about who is it that will abide in God's tabernacle. You see that in verse 1. So not charging usury is a sign of God's true spiritual people. And then Psalm 112, starting at verse 5. Psalm 112, verse 5, NIV version says, "Good will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice." So generous, lend freely. And you just see this again and again. Same thing in Proverbs 19, verse 17. I'm not going to read it, but you could check out Ezekiel 18, the whole chapter, and cover to some degree borrowing and lending. Now let's talk about some things Jesus said. Jesus, for example, said in Matthew 5:42, "Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." So this is basically a really concise restatement of what Jesus spoke in the Old Testament in the Levitical laws. And then Luke 6:34 to 35 says, "And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you?" So yeah, don't think you're a good person if you lend just expecting to be paid back. God says you're really a good, virtuous person if you lend without expecting to be paid back. It says, "But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the unthankful and evil."
I have a question. I mean, these are all wonderful, lovely verses and inspiration, and it sounds wonderful. But how do we handle not enabling bad behaviors and wasteful behaviors? And like if a drug addict is coming and asking for money so they can go spend it on drugs, is that something that we should continue to do to pay their bills so they can spend their money on drugs? Or
Well,
how do we reconcile these things with the generosity that
yeah, it's a great
we should
question.
have?
And I could go a long time answering, but I mean, main thing is, and I think the next and last verse actually will answer it. Romans 13:7-8 says, "Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenues. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor." Verse 8, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law." So ultimately, the point of all of this is to love somebody. And, love means at times that you will do something that's painful for you. It might involve making sacrifices, but really you're wanting to do what's best for that other person. Okay, and so then that's where it comes in. Sometimes you have to use good judgment. You have to really think about, okay, this person is asking for money. If I give them the money, what will happen from it? if you withholding the money will then, cause them suffering, will cause them to lose their home, sleep out in the cold. So like those examples God gave, I think that was in Deuteronomy, then God's going to be upset, right? That's not the loving thing. But even God shows, that he will at times allow people suffer consequences of their bad decisions if that will get them to eventually do what's right. So you have to use your judgment ultimately, but make sure you're really loving and doing what's best for that person.
I guess that is the key there, because, giving in a way that's simply enabling bad behavior isn't really the loving thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I can add one quick verse to that too, I totally hear you coming from, because my mind kind of went in the same direction. But I definitely agree. We need to have that heart that's just giving and loving, but we still need to have that wisdom at the same time where we're setting, healthy boundaries. And we see God being so clear that he is the same way. And we see that in James chapter 4, verse 3, and talking about, these people who ask things of God, about people who are just, full of lust, like they're greedy, they just want something. And in James chapter 4, verse 3, it says, "You ask and you receive not, because you ask amiss, that you might consume it upon your lusts." And so, or on your pleasures. And so God sometimes doesn't give us things we want because he knows it's not for our good. And there's times where God will say, "No, I'm not going to give this to you because you're just going to destroy, you're just going to use it for things you want, and it's not good for you." And so definitely we have to be careful that we're, having that wisdom to give responsibly. And just also, I think somebody asked a question like this like a long time ago, and I'll never forget this verse too, just because sometimes people think, well, I have that, but Jesus says freely give. So like you have to give to your own hurt. And that's also not biblical as well. Like if you read in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, basically it says, "But if any provide not for his own, especially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." So you shouldn't be giving, or worse than an unbeliever. You shouldn't be giving to the point where you're putting you or your own family in harm's way. And so, definitely.
Yeah. It's saying like we all sort of have our spheres of influence where we have more responsibility to take care for than others. Yeah.
Definitely. So I'm just throwing that out there just because I know, like growing up, like when I was first a Christian as a teenager, I took that very literally, like whatever I had, I was supposed to give it away, and to, like I give away my own lunch money, and that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do.
No.
And so, but, I'm just saying, just so people see that, the Bible is balanced. And so we just have to have wisdom.
And I think what you said there was really key, where you said, is it just what you want versus, is it something that a person really needs? And all the examples in the Bible that God gives are the needs. Someone needs clothing, they need shelter, they need, those sorts of things. And it's not about, supporting just people's lust. So we actually have some comments came in.
Yeah.
Athena
said, "Oh, thank you, Athena. You're so sweet.
You're so glad that you could join us again today."
Athena says, "Hello, love your insight into the Holy Word." Yes, so great to have you here, Athena. We're so glad that you are blessed by this time.
And then Mikey Noodles has some great comments.
So Mikey Noodles says, "Yeah, this is a struggle for me too. Sometimes I feel like not giving money to panhandlers because I think they'll just buy booze is just an excuse I use." Another comment. "Judging somebody by their looks and situation and assuming they will spend that money on drugs and alcohol is sort of against James 2:3.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's something I struggle with too. I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of people asking for money. You just go to the street and you see a lot.
Really got to pray and listen to the Spirit.
And I think one of the key things here also is like there's a difference between somebody who is in a true present time of need and somebody who has made themselves a career panhandler. And this is, we live in a community also where there are definitely career panhandlers. This is all they do. They make up, they take the hardest parts of their lives and create this story that they know how to deliver masterfully to emotionally manipulate people to take pity on them and give them money day after day after year after year after year. And that is all they do. That's not a constructive use. Like, they're not laboring. Like, God says we're to labor. We should work 6 days a week. And panhandling isn't really work. So they're working it, but like, that's not consistent. That's not the productive form of labor that God is, I believe, wanting people to earn their living through. And so we have to be mindful too. This is the wisdom, coming back to wisdom, is, are we just continuing to feed this behavior, or are we actually meeting they are honest working people trying to provide for themselves, and they've just come on a hard time and need that assistance for a time to get through that situation. What are your thoughts on that, Tina?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I think, again, it goes back to, praying for God's spirit and God's wisdom to know, how and when to help as much as you can. And, when it comes to Mikey Noodles, I totally feel you, because my heart breaks when I see people on the side of the street asking for it. I literally have just broken down in tears, because my heart breaks for them. I see them as God's people, and God loves them. They're somebody's child, and they're God's child, at the end of the day. And so, I definitely feel for them. But I always do pray, like, God, give me wisdom. And if I can, give something. Sometimes it's not money. Sometimes I'll just offer food or something like that. And I think it comes down to, knowing, having, again, that wisdom, because, there's been people that have been really grateful for, anything, and I can see that they're just in a state of need. And there's been people that have just been, like, I only want cash. And it's like, okay, well, maybe, maybe we need to find a real need somewhere with somebody else. So anyways.
And I think it's also that conviction and for, like, I know there've been many times I've been in these situations and I have prayed, Lord, like, there are times where God has told me to give money to this homeless person, or, even to this panhandler. And I really feel God telling me to do this. And then there are other times where God's not telling me to do that. And in fact, I'm getting the sense, like, stay away from this person, stay away from this situation. That's what I feel God is telling me to do. And don't go there. And so I think it does also, like, we are supposed to have a living relationship with God. And, yes, we are supposed to have a generous and giving heart, but that doesn't mean that we should be just allowing ourselves to be taken advantage of and exploited all the time either. So,
yeah.
We got another person joining us on Facebook, and we're not able to see your name, but that's okay. Thank you for joining us. And he says, or she says, be wise in giving. But this is an interesting comment. Don't help those who don't help themselves. I used to be a big believer in that statement. And after working on the documentary on mental health, really come to understand that there really are people who are in a position that they're not able to help themselves. And it gets back to having to have a lot of discernment to identify, is this person in their situation because of their decisions and they're continuing to want to repeat those bad decisions? Or is it someone who is just so much in darkness, can't see the way out, and incapable because of health issues, mind issues, whatever, that they really need someone to jump them out of it?